system is the master controlling and communicating system in the body. We've already looked at this because we looked at all the way our body kind of monitors and tries to maintain homeostasis. And again, we talked about the brain a little bit, but again, master controlling and communicating system of the body, responsible for every thought, action, emotion. Its cells communicate by electrical and chemical signals. We've already talked about with the muscle chapter where we talked about, we create these impulses and then we release these neurotransmitters. This is what they're talking about with the electrical and chemical. So it's these action potentials. At the end of that action potential, when it hits that terminal, we release these neurotransmitters, and that's the chemical part, okay? And then these electrical and chemical signals, they're going to be very rapid or very fast. They're going to be very, very specific because, again, our body wants to be in control of every different little part of the body, and they're going to cause an almost immediate response. And again, we're trying to maintain homeostasis and a lot of these things. If it takes too long, we're not going to be able to do that very, very well. Okay, so we have three overlapping functions. And again, we looked at this kind of in the earlier chapters, but we have our sensory input, we have our integration, and then we have our motor output. And you want to really just think about a lot of like which way is this information kind of traveling, and those are a lot of the ways that the questions on the multiple choice are going to be kind of set up too. Okay, so sensory is going towards the brain, motor output's going away from the brain, and then we just want to throw some kind of new terminology in there. Okay, so this is our sensory input. So the nervous system uses its millions of sensory receptors. Again, you have millions of receptors all over the body. They're going to monitor changes that are occurring inside and outside the body. And then again, they're going to gather this information. And then this information is going to be called this sensory input. Okay, and again, we're going to be sending that kind of up to the brain to be kind of analyzed. So the integration part is the nervous system is going to process and interpret that sensory input that it just received, right? So we're gathering all this info, we're going to send it up to the brain, and then our brain has to kind of process it and sort of figure out what it means, right? And then once it figures out what it means, it's going to decide what should be done at each moment based on that input. And again, the main goal is to, again, maintain homeostasis, okay, in the body, or just, keep the body functioning at the highest level possible. So motor output is kind of how it does that, right? So our nervous system activates effector organs. And again, we want to think of these, we think of effector organs and we think of glands, but you also want to think about these are kind of, our muscles are included in this one too. Okay, and these are the ones that we're going to activate these effector organs, and this is in an effort to kind of cause a response or sort of bring things back to homeostasis, right? So this is how your brain sort of decides, okay, I need to make a change, and it activates these glands or these effectors to kind of make that change, okay? And that response is going to be called the motor output. And again, you want to think of sensory input as going towards the brain, motor output as is moving away from the brain, and again, moving towards those effector organs. So here's the example, or a good example, okay? So we talk about we're driving a car and we see a red light, okay? So seeing a red light while driving, that's going to be your sensory input, is that your eyes see the light as being red, okay? Your nervous system is going to integrate. So we're going to take that sensory input, we're going to send that red light up to the brain, and then your brain is going to apply the meaning, okay? And your brain knows that red light means that you're supposed to stop. And then the motor part is going to be your foot is going to step on the brakes, right? So your brain is going to tell your muscles in your leg to put some pressure on your brake and make you kind of stop your car. Right? And it's always good to have a good example to kind of work through, because then when I get that question on my exam, I can think back to this one and I can try to put everything in the proper sequence and sort of remember, okay, my motor output was activating my muscles, my integration was my brain understanding what that red light means, and then the sensory part was just my eyes kind of seeing that red light. So now we want to break the nervous system down into all its different parts. So we can break it down into two parts. We're going to have a central nervous system, and we're going to have a peripheral nervous system. And we're going to look at this chart here in a second. And again, this is kind of a really good one. And you can see that the sensory nervous system is just, again, brain, spinal cord. It's pretty simple. And it's the peripheral nervous system that kind of has all these different little branches. And part of this chapter and all these kind of information and all these little segments that we're going to look at is just understanding what each one of these is and what the role of each one of these is, okay? But for right now, we just want to know that we have the central nervous system, and then we have the peripheral nervous system, and then we're going to look at all the different little parts, and then as we move through the chapter, we're going to look at each part a little more specifically, okay? So this is your central nervous system. Again, just consists of brain, spinal cord, okay? Nothing else. So this is my integration control center. Again, it's going to interpret sensory input, and it's going to dictate my motor output once it decides what should be done. So peripheral nervous system, this is everything outside the central nervous system. Again, it's easy because I have brain, spinal cord. Anything that's not the brain or the spinal cord is going to be peripheral nervous system. So it consists of nerves extending from the brain and the spinal cord. You're going to get two types. You're going to get your spinal nerves, so they're going to carry impulses to and from the spinal cord. And then you're going to get the cranial nerves, and they're going to carry impulses to and from the brain. So I have brains that come off my spine, or I have nerves that come off my spinal cord. I have nerves that come off of my brain. Those are going to be my cranial nerves. And again, they're running to and from the brain, but again, they're going to be part of the peripheral nervous system. The one that always kind of messes people up is these cranial nerves, because again, they're going to come off the brain, and a lot of times we think that these are going to be part of that central nervous system, but again, only the brain, only the spinal cord is considered central nervous system. Everything coming off of those is going to be considered part of that peripheral nervous system, okay? And what we're doing is we're linking all parts of the body to that central nervous system and allowing me to send all that information up to my brain and allowing my brain to control all the different parts of my body. So here is a picture of the brain. You have the spinal cord going through the center, and then I can see I have branches that go to just every single part of my body. So your peripheral nervous system has two functional subdivisions, and again, we can go back to that picture here, but we want to realize that we have a sensory, okay, part, and we have a motor part, okay. And the proper term for sensory, or again, we're thinking about, which direction is these impulses and this information traveling. The proper name for that is going to be this afferent division, and afferent just means that it's traveling towards the central nervous system. So it consists of nerve fibers that convey impulses to the central nervous system from those sensory receptors, and again, they're located throughout the body. So motor, proper term for that is going to be efferent, and again, those are really good multiple choice questions, and it just means that it's carrying things away, so it transmits impulses from the central nervous system to those effector organs, and again, we want to remember that that includes our muscles, includes our glands, and these impulses activate muscles to contract, or they're going to activate our glands to secrete, whatever they're kind of producing. Okay, so we get a couple more good definitions, but again, they're just extra terms to kind of tell you, okay, sensory information going towards the brain, afferent, motor, moving away from the brain, and then that's going to be efferent. But again, really good multiple choice questions in this first part of the chapter. So sensory division, afferent, we're going to have two parts to this too, okay? So we have somatic. Soma always means body. So these are my somatic sensory fibers, and you can see soma equals body. Again, they're transmitting impulses, right, from your skin, your skeletal muscles, and your joints. Okay, so that's all the different parts of my body. And then we're going to have a separate division that's going to be my visceral sensory fibers. And they're going to do the same thing, transmitting these impulses up to my brain, but this is going to come from our organs. So you can see in this way, we're kind of separating our skin, our skeletal muscles, our joints, and we're separating our organs so that our body can and our brain can kind of keep track of these different types of information. Okay, so it wants to know what your muscles are doing, your joints are doing, and it also wants to know what all your organs are doing at the same time. So now we have our motor division, again, efferent, moving away. It also has two parts. So we have the somatic nervous system. So it conducts impulses from my central nervous system to my skeletal muscles. Same sort of principle, okay? So soma is body. I'm going to have a totally other system that's going to control all my glands and my organs and things like that. But again, the somatic part is, again, central nervous system to the skeletal muscle. This is another important multiple choice question too, is that this somatic nervous system is referred to as the voluntary nervous system, okay? And this means that we can consciously control our skeletal muscles. So this is kind of the only one that we can kind of think about and be like, hey, I want to move my arm, I want to do this, I want to pick these things up. All the other ones, that the autonomic is meaning that it's automatic and it's something that we're not consciously aware of. Our body's just going to do it by itself. Okay, so autonomic nervous system, nerve fibers that regulate the activity of our smooth and cardiac muscles, glands, and again, this is going to be involuntary nervous system, which means that we're not in control of it. Okay, so another just bunch of, we're breaking things down on that little chart and we're putting them all into their proper categories, but we're trying to keep track of all these good definitions and know, what do we control, what are we in control of, what are we not in control of, and again, which way are these impulses kind of traveling. So now we get to the autonomic nervous system. So this one, again, can be divided further into two subdivisions. So again, you want to go back to that little chart and you want to kind of have it beside you and sort of print it out and then just sort of, follow the arrows and sort of break everything down into all the different little categories. Okay, so I can divide my autonomic nervous system into two more parts, and I get this sympathetic division and I get this parasympathetic. Some of us have kind of heard of these before, and we've heard of the sympathetic division as this fight or flight. So it's mobilizing my body systems during activity. We're going to do, a bunch of information on the autonomic nervous system. But again, this one is kind of stimulates you. And again, we're activating this to kind of stay alive. This is where we're either going to run away to stay safe, or we're going to stay in sort of fight to kind of stay safe. Okay, parasympathetic is the opposite. This one's usually recognized as being this rest and digest, and this is where we're trying to conserve energy. We're trying to promote housekeeping functions during rest, so we're trying to get rid of waste. We're trying to store energy. And again, this one's going to be a little bit more inhibitory. And these are the two where it's hard to activate both of these at the same time. And what you'll kind of hear is, you'll hear that old saying of like, you shouldn't go swimming after you eat. And the reason that that's difficult is because you're kind of activating these two systems at the same time, right? Your body's trying to digest your food, and then you start to be really active at the same time, and your body kind of only has so much blood and resources to do both of these. And what it ends up doing is it shuts off that rest and digest, or that parasympathetic division, because you need your muscles to work properly to kind of stay alive. And then as you shut down all these different little systems, you start to have all those stomach problems because your body didn't get to finish what it was trying to do. Okay, well, we'll come back to some of the autonomic stuff as we get further down into the chapter. So we're back to our little picture. And again, I just want to be able to kind of follow the arrow. So central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, right? Brain, spinal cord, everything else. My peripheral nervous system, I have my sensory division and I have my motor division. And then for my motor division, I have different parts because I'm trying to control my skeletal muscles, right? And I'm trying to control my organs and my glands and things like that in the body, okay? And then the very last one of the autonomic is sympathetic, right? Fight or flight, parasympathetic, and this is where I'm trying to sort of rest and digest. So a good one to come back to, especially as you get to the end of the chapter. And again, a lot of questions will come from, just do I know, okay, what can my motor division be divided into? What can my autonomic system be kind of divided into? So really, really important one just to kind of follow through and again, know which way all this information is traveling and sort of what each part is kind of trying to control in the body. So now we get to our nervous tissue, and again, we're looking at just really like the structure at this part, and it's made up of two principal cells. You're going to have these neuroglial cells, and you want to remember them as supporting cells. And then I'm going to have my actual neurons, and these are going to be the actual nerve cells. So these are going to be the ones that respond to stimuli, okay? And they're going to be the ones that are going to transmit these electrical signals because, again, we're trying to transmit these signals, release our neurotransmitters, send all this information in different parts of the body. So we get 6 types of neuroglial cells, and again, these are good multiple choice questions. We get 4 in the central nervous system. So, an easy way to do it is like, hey, which one of these is not a neuroglial cell for the central nervous system? And again, you're going to have 4 for the central nervous system, and I'm going to have 2 for the peripheral nervous system. So my central nervous system neuroglial cells are astrocytes, microglial cells, I have ependymal cells, and I have these oligodendrocytes. And all I want you to know is that these 4 are part of this, and I want you to know just what the basic function of each one of these are going to be. And the peripheral nervous system ones are going to be easy because they're going to have ones that have the same function, just the names are going to change a little bit. So the first one is the astrocytes. Okay, they're support and brace. These ones, their job is to support and brace the neurons. They're going to anchor them to nearby capillaries. They're going to play a role in exchanges between neurons and capillaries. But again, they're mostly just supporting and bracing, okay? And they're going to control that chemical environment and sort of keep everything clean and functioning properly around those neuron cells, okay? Microglial cells, they're going to monitor the health of nearby neurons. So these ones are really cool because they can sense when neurons are injured or malfunctioning, and what they're going to do is they're going to move towards them. They're going to transform into this special type of macrophage. We're going to talk about that in the blood chapter. And then they're going to break down sort of any sort of invading microorganisms or any sort of neuron debris. So again, their main job is to just keep everything really, really healthy. Okay, ependymal cells, they're going to line the central cavities of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so they're forming a barrier for this cerebral spinal fluid that fills those cavities. And again, they're going to help to kind of circulate this fluid that goes around in all these cavities. We'll come back to that when we start looking at the brain and the spinal cord. And they're going to help to just kind of keep it, provide some cushioning, but they're also going to help me to sort of provide nutrients to all these structures too. Oligodendrocytes, okay, this is probably the most important one and the one that pops up on all the tests all the time. But these are the ones that are going to line up along the thicker nerve fibers of the central nervous system. They're going to wrap tightly around that fiber. And then this is the important part, is that they're going to produce an insulating covering called the myelin sheath. And again, you want to know which which type of cells produce the myelin sheath in the central nervous system and which ones produce the myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so the oligodendrocytes are producing that myelin sheath, but it's going to be in that central nervous system. Okay, and then I get my neuroglial cells in my peripheral nervous system, and again I only get two. I have my satellite cells and I have my Schwann cells, and you're going to see why that oligodendrocyte is important here in a second. So the satellite cells are the astrocytes of the peripheral nervous system. So I don't even have to really memorize all the things that the satellite cells do. I just have to realize, okay, my satellite cells, they're the same as the astrocyte, but again, they're functioning in that peripheral nervous system. So again, it's support, bracing, exchanges between the neuron and the capillaries. Okay, and then the Schwann cells are going to be similar to the oligodendrocytes, but again, Schwann cells are in the peripheral nervous system. Okay, and again, they're going to form that myelin sheath, but it's going to be in the peripheral nervous system instead of that central nervous system. So now we get to the neurons. So these are the actual nerve cells. So remember, all the other ones were supporting cells. And now we move on to the neurons. So these are the structural units of the nervous system. They're going to conduct messages from one part of the body to the other. That's the basic function of all these neurons. Again, I'm conducting these messages in the form of nerve impulses or electrical impulses, or you'll hear action potentials. They're all going to kind of mean the same thing. Okay, so they have extreme longevity. They have to last your whole lifetime. Okay, and then this is the bad part, is that they cannot divide, cannot be replaced, and this is why damages to these neural structures is really, really hard on the body. Okay, we're just not good at, nerves heal really, really slow, and your body has to create all these different little pathways, and again, sometimes it just, it's not able to sort of repair the damage that is kind of done. So that's one of the bad things, okay? So they will last a long time, but if they get damaged, they're really, really hard to fix. High metabolic rate, which means that they require a constant supply of oxygen and glucose because they're just very active and they need a lot of energy. And this is another bad part, is that they can only survive for a few minutes without oxygen. And we all kind of know that, when you're underwater or, you're suffocating or you're drowning, one of the things, even if you survive, a lot of times you'll have brain damage or you'll have neural deficits. And it's because even though the rest of your body survives, these cells, they don't survive very long without that oxygen to kind of keep them healthy and keep those nutrients getting towards them. So neurons can vary in structure, but they're all made up of these two things. So they're all going to have a cell body, and then they're going to have one or more slender processes. Okay, so if you look at this picture, here's my cell body, and then these little things sticking off of the cell body, and this little long one here, are going to be the slender processes. And then now we're going to look at sort of what each one of those are and sort of the functions of all these different little parts too. Okay, so cell body, and then these are all the processes. Okay, so here's my cell body, and you want to think about this neuron is basically just a cell, so it's going to have all the things that a normal cell is going to have: the nucleus, the mitochondria, rough endoplasmic reticulum, all the things that we looked at in that cell chapter. Okay, so it's the major biosynthetic center of a neuron, so it's going to make things like proteins, chemicals. You're going to have this plasma membrane of the cell body, okay? And the main cool thing about this one is that it's going to be used to receive info from other neurons, so we're going to use it for a lot of communication. And we're going to look at that when we start to look at the little processes in there too. Okay, so most neuron cell bodies are located in the central nervous system, where they can be protected by the skull and the vertebrae, because remember, brain, spinal cord, brain is encased in my skull, and then my vertebrae are going to protect my spinal cord for me. And I get two other really important definitions that kind of pop up on tests all the time. I'm going to get a nuclei, and sometimes as you're reading through the chapter, this is where those medical dictionaries kind of come into play. But a nuclei is a cluster of cell bodies, but it's going to be located in the central nervous system. And then a ganglia, and we're going to see some pictures as we move through the nerves where you'll see these little ganglia and these little nuclei. But a ganglia is going to be a cluster of cell bodies, but these are going to lie in the nerves of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so they're both clusters of cell bodies, but again, one is in the central nervous system and one is going to be in the peripheral nervous system. So now we get to the processes. Okay, so these are arm-like processes that extend from the cell bodies of all neurons. Okay, so bundles of neuron processes in the central nervous system are going to get their own name, and they're going to be called tracts. And bundles in the peripheral nervous system are going to be called our actual nerves that we kind of think of. Okay, so we're bundling all of these processes up together, and again, we're going to give them their own names. In the central nervous system, they're called tracts, and in the peripheral nervous system, those bundles are going to make up what we think of as our nerves. So you get two types of processes. You get dendrites and you get axons, and we saw those in the picture here. Okay, and dendrites, again, these are the ones that are going to come off of the cell body, and these are the ones that are going to be short, tapering, they're going to diffuse, they're going to branch into all these little extensions. They're typically going to be hundreds of dendrites clustered close to the cell body. And here's the important part is that these are the main receptive or input regions of information kind of coming into the cell body. Okay, so conveys incoming messages towards the cell body, and your axons are going to be the opposite, where they're going to be my way to sort of send these impulses away from the cell body. Okay, so let's look at a picture here. So here's our cell body, and these are all our little dendrites, okay? And again, these are bringing information or impulses into the body and kind of telling this cell kind of what's going on around it and what it should be doing. The axon is a little bit different. So each neuron has a single axon. It's going to arise from this axon hillock. And remember, this picture is a really good one for kind of labeling for our practical too, okay? Because it has all the things that we sort of need to be aware of. So it arises from the axon hillock, which is going to be the cone-shaped area of the cell body. We'll see that in a second. Axons can be short or long, okay? So motor axons are the skeletal muscles. They can extend all the way from your spine, kind of all the way out to the muscles in your leg, so they can be really, really long. And then a long axon, again, is going to be what we consider a nerve fiber. So each neuron has only one axon, but these axons can have branches, and those are going to be called these axon collaterals. Axons also branch profusely at their ends. We saw this in the muscle chapter, right, where we get these terminal branches. And we also saw the knob-like distal endings of those terminal branches, which are the axon terminals. And this is the part in the muscle chapter that we looked at that's going to contain those neurotransmitters. Okay, so you want to go back to the picture. You want to find the axon hillock here, and you want to find this part is going to be the axon. And then I get these little terminal branches, and I get my little axon terminals, and then again that's going to be the secretory region, or it's going to be the part that has those neurotransmitters in there. And again, impulses coming into the body, impulse moving away from the body. So here's a zoomed in region of those terminals and those terminal branches. Okay, and then the axon functional characteristics, again, it's the conducting region of the neuron. Okay, I'm generating these nerve impulses, but again, I'm transmitting them away from that cell body. So a lot of this chapter, again, comes back to, which way are all these impulses kind of traveling. So this part we learned in the muscle chapter 2. So when the impulse reaches the axon terminals, it causes neurotransmitters to be released, okay, and these are these signaling chemicals. So neurotransmitters, they're either going to excite, inhibit. We're going to look at some of those as we move through the chapter 2. And again, they're whatever they're coming into contact with. So that can be your effector cells. So they're either going to excite or inhibit those. Okay, and then another important thing to remember is that it's just not one thing that they're doing. Each neuron receives and sends signals to many other neurons at the same time. And again, this is just a way my body is going to kind of coordinate all this information and coordinate everything that's going on in your body. Okay, we talked about the myelin sheath, or we talked about, creating myelin in the central and the peripheral nervous system, and we just want to talk about, okay, what does this myelin do for us? It's going to cover many nerve fibers, especially ones that are long or large in diameter. So it's a whitish, fatty substance, okay? It's going to protect and insulate. Again, we want to focus on what's the main function of all these things. So myelin sheath protects and insulates, and this is what it does for me. It increases the transmission speed of my nerve impulses. And you even have some diseases that sort of attack this myelin sheath that we'll talk about as we move through the chapter and sort of mess up and sort of disrupt all these little transmissions that we're trying to send through the body. So myelinated fibers conduct impulses more rapidly, and then non-myelinated fibers are going to conduct impulses a little bit slower. Okay, important to remember that myelin sheaths are only associated with axons, okay, because again, these axons are longer, they're going to send impulses over long distances. My dendrites are always going to be non-myelinated, and again, that's just a good multiple choice question, because again, they come off the body, but they're just transmitting these impulses over really, really short distances, okay? So myelin sheaths in the peripheral nervous system, again, are formed by Schwann cells. Then we had our oligodendrocytes, right? So adjacent Schwann cells do not touch each other, but are separated by small gaps. Again, this is just for labeling and for multiple choice stuff. We get these nodes of Ranvier, okay? And these nodes of Ranvier occur at regular intervals along the myelinated axon, okay? And then these axon collaterals can kind of occur at the little gaps. So I get these little gaps in here. Again, nodes are for NVA, but again, it just allows me to have all these little collaterals that can kind of branch off at that point. Okay? So myelination in the central nervous system. So the central nervous system contains both myelinated and non-myelinated axons. And again, we want to remember that the oligodendrocytes are responsible for forming the myelin sheaths in the central nervous system. Schwann cell, peripheral nervous system. Okay, and then we want to just, at the end of the chapter, we want to kind of classify all these little neurons. Okay, and we're going to do it in two ways. We're going to classify our neurons based on structure and based on function. And the structure one is pretty easy. So my neurons are grouped structurally according to the number of processes extending from their cell body. So the number of processes coming on the body is going to be their structural classification. We're going to get, multipolar neurons, bipolar neurons, and unipolar neurons. So multipolar, most common neuron type in humans, have 3 or more processes coming off of the body. And again, I have one axon, but I can have a bunch of dendrites coming up off the body. Okay, so these are the major neuron type in the central nervous system. And again, always good to know sort of which ones are the most common, so I could see there's my body. 3 or more coming off the body is going to be multipolar. Okay, bipolar, 2 processes coming off the body, an axon and a dendrite. They're going to extend from opposite sides of the cell body, and these are mostly going to be found in these special sense organs. Okay, so vision, smell, special sense, bipolar. Okay, cell body, 2 processes. And then we get to our unipolar, single short process emerging from the cell body. So it's going to have one process, it's going to divide into a T, which kind of gives it almost a 2 processes, okay, but it's coming off of the same one. And this one again is going to be kind of sensory, okay? So again, chiefly found in the ganglia of the peripheral nervous system. Again, this is where you want to be like, okay, do I remember what a ganglia is? But it's going to be that cluster of cell bodies that lie in the peripheral nervous system, okay? And then you want to be like nuclei, okay, cluster of cell bodies, but it's in that central nervous system. But again, this is my sensory stuff, okay? So function as sensory neurons, and that's again the unipolar ones. Okay, so the last part that we're going to look at here for part 1 is going to be the functional classification. So we did it by structure, now we're going to go by function, and we get groups of neurons according to the direction in which the nerves are traveling. So again, impulses are traveling. A lot of this part of the chapter is, do I know which way things are moving? And this part we already have kind of looked at. We just want to add in this little interneuron here. So we have that's relative to the central nervous system. So we have sensory, motor, interneurons, and my sensory afferent, okay, traveling towards my central nervous system, right? Usually going to be unipolar, bipolar. They're carrying info to the central nervous system for interpretation. And again, they can be really, really long because they have to go from every single different part of the body. Okay, so here is my spinal cord. Here is my sensor traveling all the way up to the spinal cord and then up to the brain for interpretation. Okay, and then bipolar, here's my eye, special senses, okay, but moving towards the brain, sensory. Okay, so now we get my motor, efferent, carrying impulses away from the central nervous system, and again, they're going to my effector organs, muscles, glands. Motor neurons are going to be multipolar. Okay, so again, direction away from the central nervous system towards that muscle or that effector. And then the interneuron is the one that we've kind of added, or these are also called association neurons, and they're going to conduct impulses within the central nervous system. Okay, so within the spinal cord or within the brain, they're going to integrate our sensory input and our motor output, and again, they're just allowing me to sort of coordinate all these things that are going on at the same time. And these are almost always going to be multipolar. Okay, so here's a picture of our interneuron. Again, you can see here's my spinal cord. So these are the ones that are doing things within my central nervous system. Okay, and that's the end of part 1. So again, we're going to break this up into a couple different parts just to make it a little bit easier to kind of get through. But you want to kind of try to stay on top of it because again, we have 2 weeks. We have to go through the whole nervous system. We have to look at all the special senses, so our vision, our smell, our hearing, and then we have to sort of go through the endocrine system kind of right at the end. Okay.